Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast with Dave Dravecky, the former Major League Baseball pitcher, is brought to you by Compassion International. $38 a month. Release a child from poverty. It's that simple. Food, education, medical care, and vocational training. Your chance to make a difference in a child's life by sponsoring them through Compassion, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. Over 150,000 children coming to know Christ through Compassion International. It's awesome. It's a great ministry, and they do it with one goal in mind: to provide children with hope and to provide children with an opportunity to meet Jesus. Pretty awesome. $38 a month. You can sponsor a child by going to compassion.com/sportspectrum. Compassion.com/sportspectrum. Release a child from poverty today. Today on the podcast, we learn the story of former Major League Baseball pitcher, left-handed pitcher, Dave Dravecky. Now, if you're my age and you're in your mid-40s, you remember Dave Dravecky as a pitcher in the 80s with the Padres and the Giants. And Dave was a pretty good pitcher, made his debut June 15th, 1982 against the Dodgers with the Padres, then was traded to the San Francisco Giants. He was an all-star in 1983 and had a pretty good career. And things started to take a turn in many ways for Dave and would impact him for the rest of his life. In 1988, a cancerous desmoid tumor was found in his pitching arm, and he had to walk through trying to recover from that. In 1989, much to so many fans' amazement and so many people that know him, Dave returned to the pitching mound. And I remember being a high school kid watching his return to the major leagues and pitched great. 8 innings and got the win, and you just can't script it any better. And then his next start, everything changes. He broke his arm again. And 2 years later, the worst case scenario happened for Dave, and he had his arm amputated. So here on the podcast, we talked to Dave about that very difficult time of losing his arm, walking through that, being a Christian during this time, and then after losing his arm, how he's been able to turn that into good. He talks a lot about the struggles that he went through after losing his arm, after obviously retiring from baseball, but now how he can use his story for God's glory, which is really what we're all called to do. And obviously so many of us are dealt difficult circumstances in life. Most of us still have our arms, but Dave doesn't. Dave does not have his left arm. And yet, this man is living for Jesus. You will love this interview with former Major League Baseball pitcher Dave Dravecky here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Take a listen. Dave, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
It's good to talk to you, Dave. Let's start from the beginning. You grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. Tell us about what life was like as a kid growing up in Ohio. Sports, faith, just being a child of, in Ohio. What was that like?
It was awesome. I mean, we grew up in the suburbs outside of Youngstown, and mom and dad were, mom stayed at home. Dad was a blue-collar, hard-working guy, worked in a machine shop, and so, growing up as a kid, we had all those wonderful things that were available to us as young kids growing up at that point in time, and most of it was the backyard. And being able to play in the backyard, go out there and do make-up ball games. In the fall, it would be football. And then in the winter, as we moved into the winter, when we could get the snow off the driveway, we'd play basketball. We just did a number of different things growing up as kids, and it was a wonderful childhood. When I look back, mostly every family is dysfunctional to some degree, but we're a pretty cool dysfunctional family. Yeah. When I think back on what my parents were able to give us, I look back with fond memories, really good memories. My dad would, be coming home from work, and I knew it, and so I'd be standing out in the driveway as a young kid, tossing the ball up and waiting for him to come, and he would literally see me, and when I was able to make eye contact when he was in the car pulling around the corner, I'd always see him roll his eyes in the back of his head and go, I could imagine what he was thinking, oh no, here we go again. Okay, I'm going to have to play catch.
Yeah.
Well, he'd pull in the driveway, and he'd look at me, and I'd say, Dad, let's go play catch. And he'd go, give me 10 minutes, I'll meet you in the backyard. And that's what they were for us.
Yeah.
I mean, growing up, our parents were cheerleaders for my brothers and I. And so it was a wonderful, wonderful childhood.
As you got older, baseball starts to become a real thing for you, and you go to college, you play your baseball at Youngstown State, and then you get drafted into the major leagues. Tell me about that, getting drafted, and suddenly this dream that pretty much every kid has becomes a reality for you.
Yeah, it was an amazing time in my life. Being in Youngstown, Ohio, and playing for the YSU Penguins, not a very strong baseball powerhouse, you wonder, do I really have it to make it? And, sure, I can get guys out in the local area, but am I ever going to get a chance to play at the professional level? And after my junior year at Youngstown State, my record was 7-1 with a .88 ERA. I led the nation in Division IIA. And we went into postseason play, tournament play. I was selected to be the starting pitcher for the Penguins against Wright State University, and there were a lot of scouts in the stands for the opening game of the tournament. And we proceeded to lose that game 26-1, and I gave up 8 earned and 9 total runs.
That's not good.
And Wright State was actually calculating my ERA as each run crossed the plate, by the way, which didn't feel good hearing that.
I'm sure.
So needless to say, I'm sitting there thinking, my professional career, there is none. After a performance like that, you're not going to get any opportunities. So the next year I went out and I just tried to have a good time, enjoy playing college baseball, have fun, work hard, but let the chips fall where they may. And all of a sudden I'm selected in the 21st round by the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I'm going to get a chance to be a professional baseball player now. And with the opportunity, hopefully, to get to the big league someday and see my dream come true. So that experience, that day when the phone rang on the middle day of the June draft, my brother picked up the phone and said, Dave, I think this is it. And on the other end was Murray Cook. And when I heard those words, you're now the property of the Pittsburgh Pirates, I was just, oh man, it was amazing, absolutely amazing. And the journey began as a professional baseball player at $500 a month.
$500 a month. I'm sure we could spend a whole hour talking about being a minor league baseball player in the late 70s and early 80s. Tell me about faith as a kid, even before, and I want to hear your testimony in a minute because I know it's a phenomenal one, but faith growing up, faith even into high school, into college, what was faith like for you, or was there a faith?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was raised in a Catholic family, so we went to church every week. That was a very important part of our Sundays, was getting up and going to church as a family. Had some incredible experiences in church with my younger brothers, as you can only imagine, getting my mom and dad really upset at us.
Sure.
But there we were in church, and, I was an altar boy. And I've got to tell you, I don't know where this all fits in the big scheme of things, but I do believe it fits. Because I remember being a teenager, maybe 13, and walking out of St. Charles Church, getting ready to, and I may have just been to confession, and I'll never forget being literally stopped in my tracks. And I had this incredible sensation come over me. It wasn't a tingling or anything like that, but I just sensed this presence. And it was overwhelming. And it actually felt really good. And then I just went, okay. And I went about, going to the backyard where we were able to play football back there, and getting in a fight with Joe Fortine. And so,
back to being a normal kid.
Back to being a normal kid.
Right.
But that moment was really special for me because, I had always taken my religion at that point in time very seriously. It was a very important part of our lives as a family. And so I'll never forget when I was challenged to read the Bible for the first time, how important that would be. But growing up as a kid, that was a big part of our life. It was church on Sunday, and you either go over to Grandpa George and Grandma Dot's for an Italian dinner, or you go over to Babu and Zedo's for a Slovak dinner. And so that was our life. And it was wonderful. I loved it. And I'm so grateful that my parents gave me that foundation because it would springboard Jan and I both to a place where we would ultimately come to faith in Jesus.
We're talking to Dave Dravecky here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. In 1981, that East Coast boy from Ohio who was playing in the Pirates farm system is now traded to San Diego, the whole other side of the country. And a lot of things changed for you, including that whole faith thing that you were telling me about. So tell me about getting traded, what that was like to find out you're traded, and then how that really set a course for you in a different way spiritually.
Yeah, it was really interesting because just prior to being traded in 1979 and in 1980, I was invited by the Pirates to go to winter baseball in Colombia, South America. Jan went the first year with me because we were thinking we were going to a tropical paradise, and that was not the situation in 1979. It was actually very scary. There were 7 Americans that were there, and all of a sudden, one of the guys on the ball club said, "Hey, we're doing a Bible study. Do you want to join us?" And 6 of the 7 Americans, if not all 7 of us, met. I had no clue what I was getting into, but I didn't care because I was so scared. I needed to be with somebody. I needed that fellowship.
So it was more of the community than it was about the whole Bible thing.
And so as a result of those 2 years of being exposed to these guys telling their stories of faith, 1981 rolls around. I get traded to Amarillo. My roommate is Byron Ballard, who had just been traded from the New York Yankees to the Padres and shipped to Amarillo, Texas. And not by coincidence, we end up being roommates. And all of a sudden, this divine plan starts to unfold that I have no clue about, and yet I'm running into it big time. Because in the course of our getting to know one another, Byron and I started talking about spiritual things. And I was very curious with the content that he was reading in books that were on his bed. And from one thing would lead to the next, and we would start talking about, this whole idea of being a Christian, because he was reading a book by Wes Neal called The Handbook on Athletic Perfection. And I wanted to be a perfect athlete.
Sure.
So I figured, this is a great thing, man. Tell me about it. And the next thing you know, I'm being challenged to read the Bible. And I thought to myself, well, why would I say no? I was raised in the church, and that was a huge part of the Mass. Why would I not pick it up and read it for myself to discover what's in it? And so I took on his challenge, and he said, "Dave, all I want you to do is to discover who you are in relationship to God." And so I went on this journey, and it was absolutely beautiful. I was reading scripture, and it was coming alive, and I was learning all these things about this incredible, wonderful God who had entered into humanity and became very personal through Jesus.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, I discovered these wonderful truths as I was reading, truths about my position with God as one who was a sinner, but also coming face to face with the God of grace and the God of love for this sinner. And that the whole purpose of Christmas and celebrating Jesus' birth was not just because of getting gifts around the Christmas tree on Christmas Eve or Christmas morning, but it was actually a celebration of a life that would change lives forever. And then Easter became very real to me because Jesus now died on the cross and he conquered death and sin by rising again 3 days later. And so I'm getting this message through Scripture and I'm overwhelmed. And all it says is you have to believe
That's
to
simple.
be born again.
Yeah.
And I was floored at this incredible gift. Ephesians 2:8-9 says, For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this not of yourselves. It is a gift of God, not by works, so that no man can boast. The one thing about growing up in that Catholic faith was that this was a works-oriented process in hopefully someday the goods outweighing the bads to get to heaven. And all of a sudden I was coming face to face with grace that said it is not about works, so that no man can boast. And it's a free gift. And all you have to do is believe. Accept that gift. Repent of your sin. Actually confess your sin.
Yeah.
And then begin this journey with Jesus. And I was overwhelmed to the point where I said, I really don't have a choice. But the reality is I'm already living in one choice. And that choice is not being a part of God's family. And I want to be a part of God's family. And when I share this, it's very important to understand this has nothing to do with Catholicism. Because every religion in history has failed in its attempt to reach out to God and to please Him. Because we're human, and by nature, we're sinful. But the reality of what I've come to learn is about a relationship with the God of the universe who came to this planet and in the form of Jesus showed us the way to life by believing and trusting in Him and embracing the gift that He has given us through the cross. That to me was overwhelming. So it makes no difference to me whether you're Catholic, Baptist, or anywhere else in between. This is about me and Jesus. And what Jesus did for me was He gave me the greatest gift that the universe has ever been given. And that gift is the gift of life in Him. And so that summer, my wife and I, after sharing this journey with her, became believers.
And it happened to your wife just like it happened to you?
No.
Okay.
She was the skeptic.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, she was an accountant and didn't join me until the accounting season was over, the tax season was over.
Yeah.
And when I started this journey out in front of her, the one thing she said when she called, we talked a lot, and I was going crazy. I'm calling her going, you're not going to believe what I'm reading. I'm reading the Bible. And I mean, she used to try to get me to read the Bible before. And I would say, no, that's for the priest, and that's not for me. And now all of a sudden I'm sharing this with her, and the one thing she said to me was, whatever you do, don't you make any decisions until I get there. And I was like, okay, babe, I'm holding on, but hurry up, hurry up.
Let's go.
When she got there, I started sharing these things with her, and on August 27th of 1981, and the only reason why I remember that is because I wanted to go back and remember the day that I was baptized, to drive a stake in, that this is the moment that I publicly professed my belief in Jesus, my faith and my trust in Him. And I wanted that to be a real point in my life where this new life began. And so I look back on that with fond memories. Byron and his girlfriend were the witnesses to the baptism of Jan and I, and Pastor Roy Wheeler at Paramount Terrace Christian Church in Amarillo, Texas, baptized us. And it was the sweetest moment of our lives.
Talking to Dave Dravecky here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. All right, so you have this newfound faith, this excitement, this new life that is found in Christ, and now your baseball career starts to become not just the minors anymore. And you get to the majors in San Diego, and you're an all-star in 1983, and you're in the World Series in 1984, and things start to take shape. So talk about what that was like becoming a big league player, and you have this very new faith that's still kind of developing in you. What was that like?
There was some good to it, there was some bad to it, and there was some ugly in it. Mm-hmm. Because, I still entered into this faith with thinking that somehow, because of Christ's death on the cross, even though the scriptures tell me I'm made brand new, for some reason, I had this idea that I had to continue working really hard to please God. And so I stepped into this faith journey, and in the beginning it was extremely exciting, and there were a lot of wonderful things going on. And at every intersection that I found myself in some type of challenge to go to the next level, it was always through the encouragement of another pastor or the encouragement of my teammates. And those were very wonderful moments. But the way I'm wired, I have to put this list of things together to do. And if I can check those things off, then I've done good. And I would put this list together. In working out as an athlete, you go into the gym and you go onto the baseball field and you do all these things to prepare to go out there for the game. Preparation is critical to go out there between the lines and to perform at your highest level. Well, it's no different in my faith. You go into this preparation mode and you work really hard, because in the end, the result is going to be being on the field pleasing God. And I discovered that was so hard to do. It was so hard to do. And so those early years walking with Jesus, I learned some wonderful things from some wonderful pastors and some wonderful people that were in my life and some great teammates. And we had some incredible experiences. But I also wore a mask, and I wore it well. And there were a lot of bad things that I look back on in my life where I sinned that, I'm so sorry that those things happened. But that's the reality of every story. And there were also some ugly things in my story. And some of that, I'm ashamed of. Being verbally abusive to my family, getting angry at my kids for no reason, putting demands on my wife and asking her to do things that, quite frankly, I could have been doing to help her, but instead saw it as something I expected from her. And so this faith ebbed and flowed. And as a married couple, as a couple raising kids, we did some things good, I did some things bad, and I did some things ugly. Quite frankly, my wife was all about good. She had very little bad, if any bad in her at all, and there was no ugly. And she did not like it when I got ugly, and she didn't like it when I was bad. The only thing is, she would retreat instead of confronting. And so that had an impact on her. So here we are living this life, and now all of a sudden, after 6 years in the big leagues, I get traded to the San Francisco Giants. Yeah. And life is sweet, man. Yeah. We're at that intersection where there's been huge change, but it's good. We go to the postseason. We lose to the Cardinals in the playoffs, but I pitched the 2 best games of my career. So faith is good, baseball's good, therefore wife is good, kids are good.
Everybody's good.
Everybody's good. And now all of a sudden, it's 1988, and I start having some arm problems. And the next thing you know, a small lump is developed on the outside of my left arm, and I'm sitting in an examining room waiting for the doctors to come back after they had just taken an MRI. And Jan and I are getting prepared to hear what the doctors have to say. And I've got to tell you, sitting in that room, I didn't know what to think. Quite frankly, Jan and I were under the impression that it was Blocker's bruise, that muscle tissue had torn from throwing the baseball so much, and it had simply calcified. And when we heard the doctors outside our examining room with the door slightly opened, looking at the films before they came to see us, and we heard the word cancer, we were floored. We looked at each other in silence like, oh my God, what is going on? Yeah. And I'll never forget looking at Jan and saying, you know what, we need to pray. And I don't wax eloquently, so I just said, God, I don't know what we're about to experience, but whatever it is, please give us the strength to endure. That's all I ask. The doctors came in and they confirmed that I had cancer. And I've got to tell you, Jason, that was not, those were not pleasant words to hear.
Sure.
It was a very, very difficult moment. I had what I call an outer body experience, where I kind of left the examining room and I went immediately to, if I die from this disease called cancer, who's going to marry my wife?
Wow. That's where you went to.
That was the initial thing that happened.
Wow.
I thought, who's going to raise my kids?
Right. You thought death sentence right away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear the word cancer, the big C word, man, and I'm done. I'm toast. I'm 32 years old. And, it's really interesting because as faith ebbed and flowed over those 6 years, in the ebbing and flowing of the good, the bad, and the ugly, God was maturing us. God was moving us through this story. He was helping me to see certain things about him, about me, about our marriage, about being a parent, that were all good. And now we were at this crossroad, and I was so grateful for the foundation that was laid that would ultimately allow for that prayer to be answered. Because God did give us the strength to endure.
Did you run from him, Dave? I don't mean to interrupt you. Because a lot of people, when I've heard stories like this, even believers, Christians, retreat. They kind of talked about your wife retreating. A lot of people retreat from God. They don't run towards him. I wonder, you say you guys prayed the second you even heard that word cancer.
Yeah.
That faith helped you through it, obviously, and helped you endure.
Yeah, our faith was what got us through.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even holding on to God. We didn't have the strength to hold on to God. And when we finally let go, what we realized was we fell into his arms. And that became a beautiful picture of God loving and caring for his kids in the midst of their darkest moment. And yet, there was so much uncertainty out there in front of us. We had no idea what the future was going to look like, and I was faced with the reality that I may not be around.
Right.
And so it caused me to begin to think about things that mattered most. And I've got to tell you, it put life in perspective really fast. It gave me a wake-up call to some of the bad and the ugly of Dave Dravecky. And I think it was then that I began to fully understand the power of God's grace, because in the midst of my ugliness, even though I struggled with believing this, I've come to learn that on my worst day, he loves me more than I can comprehend. And so as we moved into this season of life and dealing with the cancer, talk about the struggle to please God. My gosh. I mean, I'm dealing with cancer. I'm physically knocked down. I'm emotionally whacked. And I'm spiritually whacked. So I get hit on all sides of this being of Dave Dravecky in his journey and his story, along with my wife. And we struggled tremendously through all of that. When on the outside, on the other side of that door of our home, when we went out in the public, everybody thought we were being so strong. And they were reporting, we are so amazed at your strength. Please help us. We want that strength. And I'm going, if you only knew what was going on behind closed doors and how afraid I was to die, and how I struggled in my faith to trust Jesus through this process. I didn't doubt him that he existed. I didn't ask why. I just struggled in my faith because I didn't have energy to communicate with him. I didn't have energy to read the Bible. I didn't have any energy to do anything spiritual. And therefore, a guy who really gets it wrapped up in his head that the only way you can please God is by doing all this good stuff, read, pray, study, fellowship, get into Bible studies, go to church. I didn't want to do any of that because I didn't have the energy to do any of it. And it was amazing how God showed up in the beginning when Jan would say, look, I'll read to you and I'll pray for you. And don't forget, you've got a lot of people praying for you, Dave. Don't worry about praying. If there was ever a picture of grace that was displayed to me in understanding how powerful that grace is from God, it was my wife. It was overwhelming. It wasn't in the moment. But looking back, it's overwhelming to see that how powerful that grace was to help me through this process. And, and then you enter into surgery and the doctors tell you outside of a miracle, you're never going to pitch again. I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Right. So
do I even care about pitching right now?
Right. Like that's the last thing you could care about probably. You just you don't want to die at this point.
I don't want to die. And now I'm moving down this path of healing. And the next thing you know, they're giving me permission to start trying to come back. And so I can start dreaming again. Jason, it was the coolest thing because I'm like a little boy all over again. That's 8 years old, dreaming to get to the big leagues. Only now I'm 32, and I've been told I'll never be able to pitch in the big leagues again. And they're now telling me
maybe you can.
You maybe can. And so the next thing you know,
and you did.
Yes, and it's August 10th, 1989.
I was a high school kid. I remember it very clearly.
Standing on the mound in Candlestick Park. I mean, the fans have given me a standing ovation, and I haven't even done anything yet. And I'm thinking to myself, God, you are so amazing. And what was really cool was on the way into the ballpark that morning, there was a beautiful song by Maranatha, Give Thanks with a Grateful Heart. And it started to play. And so I just kept playing it over and over again on the little cassette. That reveals the day.
Oh, I remember those days.
the cassette tape.
Oh, yeah.
And it kept playing over and over again. And the next thing you know, I'm on the mound getting ready to throw my first pitch, and everybody just went ballistic.
Yeah.
And I'm standing there wanting to respect, this incredible gift from these people. And I thought to myself, God, I'm going to give thanks.
Yeah.
And I started singing that song.
Right there on the mound.
Right there on the mound.
Yeah.
Give thanks with a grateful heart. And that's all I could feel was, God, you've given me another chance. And then I throw 7 innings of one-hit shut-up baseballs. Like, who's writing this script?
Yeah, you did pretty good.
The 8th inning, I go out. I give up, 3 runs? Stinking Luis Quinones. Unbelievable. Terry Kennedy was so mad. Afterwards, he came up to me. He goes, Dave, he messed up God's script. He messed it up. And I was like, look, all I care about is we got the W, buddy.
You got the dub.
But what an
That's
incredible moment. And then 5 days later, Jason,
Yeah.
I'm standing on the mound in Montreal. I am feeling so good about life, about my emotions are great. I'm back with the team. I'm in the saddle. Spiritually, things are going good again. I'm firing on all cylinders in every aspect of life. And I rear back and throw that fastball. My left arm snaps in half, and I fall to the ground. And I am overwhelmed with a set of words that were said to me 5 hours earlier by Bob Nepper.
Yeah, the former left-handed pitcher.
Former left-handed pitcher.
Yeah.
We were having lunch, and it was right before we went to the ballpark, and we were talking about the comeback. And we were talking about it in the context of the miracle of the comeback. And Bob looked me square in the eyes, and he said, Dave, this is not about the miracle of the comeback. This is the miracle of salvation that occurred in your life back in 1981. And God is giving you a platform through baseball to share his love with those who hurt.
Wow.
And I looked at him and I said, wow, Bob, that's really awesome, but I got a game to pitch tonight, man.
I got to go pitch.
I got to go pitch.
Yeah.
And we were like, wow, this is really amazing, isn't it? And that was kind of it, I'm laying on that ground, and all I could hear were those words over and over and over again. And in the middle of all that pain, I'm thinking, God, there is something going on in my life that is so much bigger than baseball. I wasn't in anger because my arm broke and most likely I had lost my career. There's something going on that's bigger.
Yeah.
And God's been in control of this story all along. So it's like, I don't know what's going to happen, but what's next?
Yeah.
And so I get wheeled off. I go to the hospital. I get x-rays. The confirmation of the spiral oblique break that occurred is confirmed. They give me painkillers that I don't take. I go back to the hotel, and I'm laying in the bed in my room with Atlee Hammaker, Jeff Brantley, Scotty Gereltz, Brett Butler, and Greg Litton. And I'm starving to death because my nickname was Snacks. I was always the first guy in line after the game in front of the spread. And so I'm dying for food. And I said, guys, could somebody please go get something? I missed the spread after the game.
Yeah.
So Scotty Gereltz goes out, gets a cab, and goes down to Burger King. The only thing that was open, I swear he spent $150 on cheeseburgers, or Big Mac, or Whoppers rather.
Right.
And they were doubles. And he brought them back. We pounded all of that food, including fries. I think there were milkshakes in there. Everything you could think of that we shouldn't have been eating, we were eating. Wow. And we're in this conversation about what God's up to. And they're all looking at me like, Dave, what's going on? But what was really cool was one at a time, my teammates started coming in the room. Are you okay? And they're checking up on me. And I'm realizing this is my family.
Yeah.
These are the guys that love me. They really care about me. It doesn't make any difference if these guys were part of Baseball Chapel or not, knew Jesus or not. They were all coming in and saying, man, are you okay? We're there with you, buddy. Hang in there.
Yeah.
My manager, the coaches. And all of a sudden, I get a knock on the door after all that's done, and I'm getting ready to go to bed, and somebody says, hey, Dave, they need you tomorrow morning to be at a press conference. Would you be willing to do that? And I said, sure. What time do you want me there? well, you're going to have to catch a flight going back, so we need you up at probably 7 to be at the press conference. So that I still haven't had my meds, my painkillers.
And you're still in Montreal.
Yeah, and we're still in Montreal at the Sheraton.
Wow.
And I'll never forget, Atlee Hammaker was on his way out, and he said, "Are you going to be okay?" I said, "Yeah, but I'm going to need some help taking a shower in the morning. Would you please come down at about 6:30? He said, "Yeah." He said, "By the way, I think it's okay to take your meds now." So I said, I probably should before I go to bed so I can at least get a halfway decent few hours of sleep. Because by now it's probably about 1:30 in the morning. Mm-hmm. And so I did. I got up the next morning. Atlee came down, helped me with my shower. I got dressed, went to the suite, and all these reporters are sitting there. And they're just staring at me. I'm like, well, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, out of the silence, which was like, it felt like 5 minutes, but it was probably 30 seconds, there was a reporter by the name of Cohen for the Sporting Green, the Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle Sporting Green, the sports section. And he looks at me and he goes, "Dave, where is your God now?"
Wow.
And 5 days earlier, I had been at the podium and giving praise and glory to Jesus. And it was printed.
Yeah.
And now he's wanting to know, where is this God that you believe in now that you have a broken arm? And I stood there and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, God, there really is something bigger going on here than baseball, because you've just opened the door for a Mack truck to drive through. And I'm like, oh, Lord, please don't let me mess this up, because I know what my response is. Yeah. And my response was, God hasn't gone anywhere. He still lives in my heart because of my belief in Jesus.
Yeah.
And the only thing that has changed are my circumstances. And now I need to find strength in him to deal with that. And
unbelievable.
It was. Yeah. It was absolutely amazing.
Well, Dave, let me ask you this. Let me interject, because 2 years later, we're sitting here taping this, and it's late November of 2018, and it's clear, obviously, you're missing your left arm, the arm that you pitched for so many years. And 2 years later, in June, that's the worst case, and the arm gets amputated. Can you walk us through that process of finding out you had to have that surgery, or I guess not a surgery, but having to have your arm amputated, and really the aftermath of just walking through life now suddenly a different person, and the arm that got you to all this glory and your platform and playing baseball is no longer even there?
Yeah, my wife and I refer to it as our identity crisis.
Yeah.
It was really interesting when the doctors called me in, because I had gone through several surgeries and radiation treatment, and had just come off a staph infection that I was still battling for 10 months. And the doctors called me in and said, Dave, we really think it's time to remove your left arm and shoulder. And I looked at him and I said, good. Let's get rid of this thing, man. Yeah. It is driving me up a wall. It's become a nuisance. I can't use it. He says, well, I need to tell you that the bottom line is I'm going to go in there and I'm going to do a biopsy first. And if I don't find cancer, I'm going to sew you back up. And I said, well, then what are you going to do if you do that? He said, well, we're going to then put a plan together to reconstruct your arm. And I said, oh, okay, well, what's the rehab going to be on that? He said, probably about 4 to 6 months. I said, oh. I said, okay. I said, I have one question. Will I be able to use it? He said, no. And I looked at him and said, then I don't want it. He said, I don't care what you find. Take it off. I don't want my arm anymore. Wow. He said, I can't do that. He said, I can't do that. I have to go through this protocol. And I said, Doc, I don't care what you've got to do. Whether you find cancer in there or not, I don't want my arm anymore. So I found out from my family doctor back in Youngstown, Ohio, because this was in New York City, in Manhattan at Sloan Kettering Cancer Research Center. Dr. Murray Brennan was my doctor. I love the man. He was amazing. He saved my life. But he had called my family doctor back in Ohio, and he got on the phone with Chuck McGowan, our family doctor, and said, Chuck, is this kid for real? He doesn't want his arm. And Chuck said, look, Murray, if Dave says he doesn't want his arm, and he's come to the conclusion that he's done. So I believe him. He's for real. He's not going to tell you, don't take it, or take it and not mean it. And so I went into that surgery and had my left arm and shoulder removed. And one of the coolest things about God, and I don't share this very often, but since it's us and it's PAO, and it's just about encouraging people on the journey and where God is in your story, and that he is real and he does show up. I wanted desperately to pray the next morning as I was prepping for surgery that night. All I had on my mind was, God, give me an opportunity to pray before I go in under the knife. And I went to bed thinking that. So the next morning I wake up and they wheel me down, and I'm thinking, okay, I need to pray. And all of a sudden the anesthesiologist comes by and says, we're going to give you the candy, but it's just going to get you started. And boom, give it to me, and I'm like, I'm gone. I'm gone.
Yeah.
Surgery's done. I'm taken out of surgery. I'm in my room. I wake up, and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I feel like getting up and going for a walk. And I tried to get out of bed and almost fell over. Pushed a button, got the nurse. She helped me back in. She said, what the heck are you doing? You should always call. You can't do that until we get your balance acclimated. So I said, I want my balance acclimated. I want to go for a walk. So she said, okay. She got me out of bed. I got acclimated. I started this walk, and all of a sudden, I see this gal come walking towards me, and she goes, Dave, do you remember me? I said, yeah, you're the one that gave me that good candy that put me to sleep. She said, yes, I am. And she says, I came to seek you out because I wanted to thank you for praying.
Wow. I
said, what? She goes, yeah, you prayed for all of us, the whole team. She said, what was even more amazing? Well, when the doctors came in that were going to do the surgery on you, you stopped and prayed for them. And you can't begin to imagine the looks on their faces when you started praying. And I just started laughing inside, and I'm like, oh my gosh, God, this is crazy. I'm not one of those guys, I'm a lot more conservative and orthodox in my faith, but man, that helped me to see that God lives outside of anybody's box.
Yeah.
And when she told me that, I was floored. And then that night, the team of doctors came and they sat around me to talk about the situation, because it's a teaching hospital as well. And one of the doctors from Dr. Brennan's team stayed behind after everybody left and confirmed what the anesthesiologist said, that I had prayed for the doctors before the surgery. And he said, Dave, it was amazing. Nothing like that had ever happened to any of those doctors. And I just want you to know, my parents are missionaries in Mexico. And I was like, wow, whoa, this is unbelievable. And so I'm in recovery. I get released and go home, and my journey begins. And I've got to tell you, Jason, to kind of sum it all up from that point to about 8 years ago, life ebbed and flowed. The good came back, the bad came back, and the ugly came back. And in the midst of some of that, dealing with being an amputee and the identity crisis, I went into clinical depression. I became very angry and verbally abusive to Jan and the kids, and it was just a really, really difficult time. And we found out who our friends were. We found out who the church was during that period of time, and some of it was okay and some of it wasn't so okay. But in the end, we found out who God is in the middle of it, because his grace was more than strong enough to get us through the way people loved us, that really did administer his grace to us. And so that was a beautiful journey of engaging with God's grace in ways that we had never experienced. And it was what helped us, along with counseling and medication, to get to the other side, and to eventually learn that my life isn't about pleasing God. Actually, it's when I trust him that he's pleased. And I've learned, and I'm learning to trust more and more. And by the way, it's probably been about 22 years now since the ugly has shown up. And I'm very grateful for that, through the help of some wonderful counselors that have guided me through the process of healing from that sin. And I'm so grateful for them and for my wife, who has really stuck with me through thick and thin. And like I said earlier, my wife has really been the picture and model of grace that God, I think, wants all of us to see. And that's why I'm so grateful that God uses broken vessels like us to share his light. Because, I used to think that the best way to reveal the light of Jesus through my life was to be perfect. And I found out through the broken vessel that I am, that it's only when you put those pieces together, it leaves cracks where the light can come through. And that's who I am.
That's good.
I'm a broken vessel, saved by grace, but now a saint who sins, but hopefully will sin less, but continues to draw closer to God because I'm learning to trust him more. And in doing so, I'm also learning to love more. And I'm very grateful for that.
He is Dave Dravecky, and we could have talked for another 2 hours, Dave. That was incredible. Your story is an inspiration, and I'm truly thankful for you to come on the podcast and share it. Wishing nothing but the best, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
Okay, buddy. Thank you.
Thanks. And many thanks to former Major League Baseball pitcher Dave Dravecky for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. I mean, just his story is incredible. And I'm thankful he was willing to sit down and really talk about it with us. And being transparent, obviously, when you're walking through a situation like that is so important. And I think his positive outlook and the joy that he still exudes, even though he's missing his left arm, is inspiring. And I'm grateful he was able to come on and share his story here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. You can give him a follow on Instagram. Dave's over there. At Dave Dravecky on Instagram. Give him a follow. He's also got a website, davedravecky.com. So you can check out everything going on with Dave there at davedravecky.com. Many thanks to Dave. Many thanks to you for listening, and to Compassion International for sponsoring this podcast. $38 a month releases a child from poverty. It's that simple. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum. $38 a month provides food, education, medical care, and vocational training. Releasing a child from poverty, all done in the name of Jesus. That's the way to go if you want to make a difference in somebody else's life. And who better than a child in need? Compassion.com/sportspectrum is the website. Compassion.com/sportspectrum. Sponsor a child today. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast. We will see you next time with a brand new episode. We also want to encourage you to subscribe and download this podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, everywhere podcasts are found. And of course, all of our content can be found at sportspectrum.com, where you can become a member and subscribe to our magazine for just $18 for an entire year. It's a great deal. Go to sportspectrum.com and subscribe today. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Have a great rest of your day.